I thought long and hard about what my last announcement would be today. And I think I picked the only verse that makes any sense for a last announcement, and that is John 3:16, which I don't even have to say, but I will. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Debbie Goodwin has our prayer today.
And it is to the God who gave us his Son that we offer our hearts so that he may look into ours and tell us what we need to know. That's what prayer is. So let's do that. Masterful God, creator of this universe and everything in it and us, we come to you because no one in our world knows more than you. And no one has gone farther to help us than you. And no one wants the best for us more than you. So why would we not come to you with our full hearts open, transparent, ready for you to tell us what we need to know? So many times we come to you as people who think we know enough, and we never do. You always know more. You always know deeper. And your knowledge can always take us farther. Because of what you know what burdens we carry. And you know the people that we are praying for. The ones who are suffering through disease and struggling through treatments and grieving fresh losses and ongoing losses. And you know how to bring healing and perseverance and help and intervention. And we ask that you would do that in each situation in a way that does the best that can be done. For that is what you always do. We thank you for this day of Sabbath, this day of rest, this day of all invitation. May we run to it, drink deeply from it, so that we have the strength and the awareness that we need to live this week with your light. And so may the words of our mouths, the thoughts that we carry, be pleasing to you, oh God, our anchoring rock and our irresistible Redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Debbie. That was beautiful. We're delighted today to have Dr. Harvey West speak to us. Harvey was my mother's pastor at Alpharetta First United Methodist Church before my mother passed away, and much beloved member of the ministry in this area for many years. Harvey, thank you for joining us. Please come up.
Thank you. I love this. I love this class, and it is good to be back. I guess it's been 2 or 3 years since I've been able to teach, but I really appreciate the invitation to come and share with you. One of the things I've always liked about this class is the sense of fellowship and love that I sense among the members of it. It's you support one another, and you've got a lot going on. And by the way, this project, this Commons project, is going to be a good one. And my experience as a pastor over the years is that projects like this tend to build a lot of enthusiasm and excitement in a church, and I see that happening too. So I'm excited about that, about being here, about you folks, and. As Malone Dodson used to say, at my age, I'm glad to be anywhere, right? But it is good. What I want to share with you this morning is is a verse of scripture, a statement that Jesus made. And there are really two parts to it. It's in the 16th chapter of John's Gospel. Jesus said, in this world, you shall have what? Somebody tell me what it is. Trouble, tribulation, as the King James puts it. Tribulation, trouble is the same thing. In this world you shall have tribulation. But be of good cheer, he continued on. And that's the second part of it. For I have overcome the world. Now I want us to look at both parts of that. The first part of it seems, if you look at the last 2 or 3 years here on this earth, seems almost like an understatement, doesn't it? In this world, you shall have to think about the things that have happened to us over the past few years. My stars, we had, I guess, for me, it seemed like it began with this pandemic, COVID-19, and and hundreds of thousands of people were dying, and the economy was upset because people were losing their jobs and businesses were closing. And we finally come up with some vaccines, and then the thing mutates, or whatever you call it, went into new strains, and it's still with us. We're still struggling with COVID-19. And that's not all. In this world, you shall have tribulation. Somebody would call this hard times, but that's only the beginning of it. On top of that, Russia brutally invades Ukraine. And that too has had an impact on the world, on the economy, on many things. I look at some of those images that we see on the news, the television screen, the destruction, not only of property, although it looks like the whole nation is being destroyed, but also then they start talking about the thousands of people who've been killed in all of that, on both sides, actually. It's hard times, folks, tribulation. It sounds almost like a promise, doesn't it? In this world, Jesus said, you shall have tribulation, and we know what he meant, don't we? And that's not all of it. It's still hitting us in rising crime rates and violence and shootings in our schools, in shopping malls, even in hospitals and churches, drive-by shootings. We read about children in their bed in their homes, and there's a drive-by shooting and they get shot laying in their bed. Tribulation. In this world, you're going to have it. And that's not all. You're probably sorry you asked me to come talk to you now, aren't you? but think about it. Those are the words of Jesus. That's not all. There's climate change and the ramifications of climate change and the raging fires out in the West and in Europe and the floods. Look at the latest news of Kentucky and the people who study these things, it's because of climate change. And I haven't even begun to talk about the personal problems and tribulations and troubles that we have. The grief at the loss of loved ones, devastating sickness. We can go on and on. Financial problems, job loss. We could go on and on and on with that. In this world, you shall have tribulation. I remember a cartoon in one of the magazines. It showed this man being rescued from this tiny island out in the middle of the ocean. He'd obviously been shipwrecked. And the rescue ship was out there, and the sailor who was in charge, I guess, of the rescue team was handing the man a stack of newspapers. These are compliments of the captain, he was saying. He wants you to read the headlines to decide if you really want to be rescued. It's true. Tribulation, trouble. It's part of life. In this world, Jesus said, in this world, you're going to have You're gonna have trip. One fellow said, he said, no, it doesn't bother me. I sleep like a baby every night. And his friend said, yeah, I do too. I wake up every 2 hours and cry. But it's there, it's real. And sometimes it affects, I think, our faith, or for some. We begin to get stressed, we begin to wonder about it. Probably back in the 70s, when were Simon and Garfunkel popular? Back in the 70s, I think. 60s, 70s, sometime in there when they were singing their beautiful music. And there was one song that they recorded, and it was not one of their more popular, I think. But in fact, I bought an album of theirs, and I'd never heard this song before until I played it. It was called Silent Night in the 7 o'clock news. And some of you not, you've heard that before. First time I heard it, I thought, oh, this is beautiful. They started out with the melodic sounds, that duo, and then it seems like somebody's talking in the background. You wonder, what's going on here? Was it a bad recording? And you hear this voice coming through. And as the song goes on, the voice becomes louder and louder. And then you realize what it is. It's a news anchor giving the 7 o'clock news. And back in that day, it was the Vietnam War and the civil rights conflicts. You remember Rap Brown? He said, violence is as American as apple pie. We've always had a tribulation, haven't we? But all that was on the news. And he was talking assassinations, John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther, and this was on the 7 o'clock news. And he was giving all of that, and it gets louder and louder and louder until at the end, the bad news drowns out the sound of Silent Night. And that's what I think happens to some of us, even those of us who are Christians. The bad things that are happening in the world tonight almost drown out. They stress us and tend to drown out our faith. And in this world, you shall have tribulation. And we wonder about it, and we ask why. Why does a loving God allow these bad things to happen in the world? Well, if you think about it, if you reason it through, there are a couple of reasons why. Number one, I think, is free will. We're created in the image of God. That's what the scriptures tell us. And what that means is that we're created as free thinking human beings, creatures. We make our own decisions. We make our own choices. We're not puppets. God, functionally, I guess God could have created a world in which everybody did exactly what he wanted us to do. We could have been puppets or robots, just doing whatever. But he didn't make us like that. That's not the kind of world God wanted. God wanted a world with people he could relate to. And so he gave us free will. Free will is a wonderful gift. But there's a fly in the ointment. Because what that means is we can say no to God as well as yes. And a large part of the problems in this world today are because so many of us and so many people say no to God instead of yes. And they go their own way, we go our own way. And there's violence and there are wars. And we do that instead of going God's way. That's one of the whys. The other why that has to do with natural disasters, well, that's all that is, the disasters, the things that we call disasters, the floods, the hurricanes, the earthquakes, those things are simply byproducts of the workings of the laws of nature, which are necessary in God's world. Byproducts, even disease, byproducts. Think of the sun. The sun can do some bad things. It can cause heat stroke. People die of that kind of thing. It can even cause cancer. But what would we do without the sun? You see, I remember that scene I always remember from one of the old God movies. You remember George Burns played the part of God. I'm sure this probably you folks, but he was talking to a little child, and the little child asked God, he said, why do you let bad things happen? And God, played by George Burns, said, this because there's one thing I've never been able to do. I've never been able to make a door with only one side. I've thought about that. The why, we can talk about the why, but even though we can explain it perhaps and give reasons for it, it's still true. In this world, you shall have tribulation. And because of that, we need help, don't we? We need help. I remember still have a first grade class, and it was close to Thanksgiving, and the teacher asked the class, she said, I would like for you to share some of the things for which you are most thankful. And the hands went up, and they began to name the things you might think. They'd say, mama and daddy, and they'd go, but this one little fella who wore glasses, he said, teacher, the thing I'm most thankful for is my glasses. And the teacher thought, hey, for a first grader, he's kind of mature. He realized that his glasses are helping. And so she asked him, she said, Tommy, would you like to share why you're most thankful for your glasses? And he said, yes, ma'am. I'm thankful for my glasses because when I wear them, the boys don't hit me and the girls don't kiss me. He was on to something, though, you see. He realized he needed help. He realized he needed, and we need help too. And we have it. Yeah. Yes. And that's the rest. That's the rest of the, you're glad I'm getting off the negative, aren't you? And we're getting to the other part now. In this world, Jesus said, you shall have tribulation. That means trouble, and we've got it. We've had it. We're going through some hard times. In this world, you're going to experience, but here it comes, but be of good cheer. Why? For I've overcome the world. I've overcome the world. And what's he telling? There's a resurrection that we Christians hold up. Have we forgotten that? That's what the whole Christian faith is built on, is God saying, is God having the last word, always. I mean, that's a historical event. We've got witnesses to talk about it, to write about it. We know about this resurrection business, and we know because of that God's going to win in the end. Ultimately, God's going to have the last word. That's the good news, and we are to bear that. We're in the good news business, folks. We're not in the bad news business. We're in the good news because we know some things. We know that God is going to win ultimately. That is the good news. It's really a matter as to whether we're stressed or blessed. That's the title that I gave to the, whether we're stressed. It has to do with attitude and perspective. Attitude is built on reality. Let me read to you what Paul says about this. In his letter to the Philippians, in the 4th chapter, he says this, and it has to do with attitude. But listen to it. He says, beloved, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. In other words, as an old gospel song puts it, build your hope on things eternal. Have faith in what God has done and continues to do. Sometimes it may seem we're losing, but ultimately we're going to win. In this world, you shall have tribulation. It's just part of life. You're going to have it. Some of you are there now, personally. And certainly the world is there. But be of good cheer, for Christ God has overcome the world. We can be of good cheer for that. Back prior to the Civil War, the famous ex-slave Frederick Douglass was going across the countryside speaking to groups, and he was talking about the evils of slavery and how we needed to put slavery down. And on one occasion, he was in Boston and he was speaking to really a packed house. But on this particular occasion, he was a little depressed, and it began to show in his speech. And he began to even doubt that anything could ever be done. He says, we may just have to get used to it because the slave owners will never relent. And we're just doomed to this kind of thing. And he was going on and on like that, when all of a sudden, right in the middle of that packed audience, this huge Black woman stood up. She looked him straight in the eye, and in this husky, deep voice, she said, "Frederick, is God dead?" Now, Douglas knew how to handle hecklers. He'd had to do that a lot of times. But that great Black woman stunned him. For a moment, you could have heard a pin drop. But then almost as one, that entire audience rose to his feet and gave an avalanche of applause that drove the despair right out of their midst. In this world, you're going to have tribulation, you're going to have struggle, you're going to have pain, but be of good cheer, for I've overcome the world. And what do you do? What do you do in the meantime? As we're waiting, the children of Israel, my goodness, when they were in exile, when after they've been conquered by the Babylonians and sent into exile, they went through some really rough times, and it wasn't just short periods of time. Many of them lived and died during that time. But ultimately they won. But ultimately, God is going to have the last word. In the meantime, what do we do? Well, what did the people of Israel do? They kept the faith. They kept on keeping on, and that's what we have to do. That's what we have to do. We have to hold our light. Each of us has the light of the gospel, the light of God's love and goodness. And we have to hold that high. Nothing can kill that. God's ways are eternal. I think it was James Russell Lowell who said, "I do not believe that God would have allowed us to get at the matchbox of this universe if he had not known that the foundation of it is fireproof." Now, that was over 100 years ago when Lowell made that statement. He didn't know anything about atomic fission or fusion or any of that. But what he was talking about was that the foundation that God has established in creation is indestructible. The love, the goodness that God has established, that he's placed in the creation of the universe and the foundation of those things you can't defeat them. You can't destroy them. Take goodness, for example. Now You can destroy good things, and a lot of that's being done right now in Ukraine. And you can destroy good people. War does that. Or you can kill good things, but you can't kill goodness. You look around us and goodness is being crucified on every side today, the violence and the crime. But we crucified goodness 21 centuries ago, and it had a resurrection. It always does. You can't kill the things of God. And if you hold on to those, as Paul says, hold on to those things. You know, whatever's true, whatever's pure, whatever's good, hold on to those things, you know, and you'll make it through because God's going to win. Nothing can destroy those eternal values of God. Nothing. In the meantime, again, you build you practice your faith, you keep the faith, you keep on keeping on. I remember hearing Billy Graham. I think it was his last visit to Atlanta. I mean, one of his campaigns here. I think it was at the Georgia Dome. Some of you may remember that. Yeah, but one thing he made have said, we went, and one of the things he said one night, I'll never forget. And I don't think it was original with him, but I like the way Billy put it in his way. He said, if you could gather all the darkness in the world into one place, it could not extinguish the flame from a single candle. Think about that. What we do in the meantime, while God's working out his plan, and you see, God's got he works on a different time frame than we do. But one of the things, and Paul says this too. In fact, he quotes God. He says, God says, let light shine in the darkness. That's in 2 Corinthians, I think. Let light shine in the dark. And that's what we need to do, is to let the light of our faith shine through our lives. And then we become part of the solution instead of part of the problem. And then we're blessed instead of stressed. If you've got that faith, if you keep that faith. Well, I guess what I'm really talking about here is the perspective. It's what we need is the perspective of eternity. When Don called me back, I guess it was in April, Don, where are you? Anyway, he called and asked me if I could teach today, and I said, yeah. And this was right after the Lenten season, and we had the Good Friday service, and Don had been there. And I was on the staff here for 12 years, I think it was. And over that period of time, we had the Good Friday services, and I participated in those, the 7 last words of Christ. And I did several of those, but I had never had the word that they gave me this time. And to me, it was the toughest word. It's the 4th word from the cross, where Jesus said, where he prayed and said, my God, why have you forsaken me? And it really made me stop and think, that was a hard time. That Friday was a hard time. And I thought about what I call my favorite sermon of all time. And Don remembered, he said, you shared this with our class before somewhere in the past. We've got a better memory than I do. But I said, okay. And he said, you might want to share some of that when you teach us. And I said, okay. But the title of the sermon, and it's in a book. He wrote a book also. I don't know what I did with the book. Here it is. It's by Tony Campolo. It's called It's Friday, but Sunday's Coming. And that title says everything, I think. It talks about the eternity of God and how we need an eternal perspective because God's timetable is different from ours. God's going to work things out, but he does it in his way. And so he says in this, I think what I'm trying to say to you this morning, and I brought the book. It's got that sermon in it. It's interesting, I think. I'm trying to keep watch of the time. I'm not sure what. Okay. It's interesting that the sermon by Tony Campolo is, at least the words and all, were not original with him. His sermon is original, but he borrowed the words, the statement from a sermon that he had heard. He belongs to a predominantly African-American church in Philadelphia. And it was on a Good Friday night that his pastor began to preach, and he used this, and Tony incorporated all of this into his sermon. But I want to read to you part of this. I'm not going to read the whole thing. But he says he started his sermon talking about the fellow, his pastor, who preached this on a Good Friday. He started his sermon real softly by saying it was Friday. It was Friday, and my Jesus was dead on the cross. But that was Friday. And Sunday's coming. It was Friday, and Mary was crying her eyes out. The disciples were running in every direction like sheep without a shepherd. But that was Friday. And Sunday's coming. He says people in the congregation were beginning to pick up the message. Women were waving their hands in the air and calling out, well, well. And then some of the men were yelling, keep on going, keep on going. And he said the preacher kept going. He picked up the volume still more and shouted, it was Friday. The cynics were looking at the world and saying, as things have been, so they shall be. You can't change anything in this world. You can't change anything. But those cynics didn't know that it was only Friday. Sunday's coming. It was Friday. And on Friday, the forces that oppress the poor and make the poor to suffer were in control. But that was Friday. Sunday's coming. It was Friday, and on Friday, Pilate thought he had washed his hands of a lot of trouble. The Pharisees were strutting around, laughing and poking each other in the ribs. They thought they were back in charge of things. But they didn't know that it was only Friday. Sunday's coming. He said he kept on working that one phrase, and over he came at us. It's Friday, but Sunday's coming. He said by the time he had come to the end of the message, I was exhausted. He had me and everybody else worked up so that I don't think any of us could have stood it much longer. At the end of his message, he just yelled at the top of his lungs, it's Friday. And he said, then all 500 of us in that congregation stood together, and with one accord we answered, but Sunday's coming. And that's it. I'm going to tear this thing up. Sunday's coming. He said, there's something to get excited about. He said, the resurrection, the heart of the Christian faith. It's what we're all about. Without the resurrection, there'd be no, we wouldn't be here this morning. There'd be no church. There'd be no Bible. It happened. God spoke. God has the last word. And here's what Campolo says about this. He said, that's the good news. That's the good news. That is the word that the world is waiting to hear. That's what we have got to go out there and tell the world's people. When they are psychologically depressed, we have to tell them that Sunday's coming. When they feel that they can never know love again, we have got to tell them that Sunday's coming. When they've lost the belief in the miraculous so that they no longer expect great things from God, we must tell them that Sunday's coming. And then he says this. I came across this as I was reading this morning, and I wanted to read this. He said, there are those who will not believe this incredible good news, and hence become cynically laid back at this exciting juncture in the human adventure. They scoff at us and say, who are you kidding? The world will always be a mess. You can't change things. There's no hope for this world. To those pseudo-sophisticated cynics, I reply, I've been reading the Bible, and I've peeked at the last chapter to see how it ends. And guess what? Jesus wins. In this world, you shall have trouble. Man, we've had it. We've got it. It's there. It'll always be with us. But be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. Let me close with this. There's a passage in the book of Exodus, back in the Old Testament. It's where Moses has led the children of Israel out of their bondage in Egypt, and they're in Mount Sinai, and they're ready to move on into the wilderness, the Judean wilderness. And some of them are complaining. They're complaining. They're worried about it. You know, I mean, what is there to hope for in a wilderness out there with the hot desert heat and the wild animals, and we don't know where food's coming from, and there's that long march, and what's there to hope for in a wilderness? But at least back in Egypt, you know, they had food to eat. They had a shelter. Man, the wilderness just holds shelter in this dreary night. But there's a verse there that says it all, I think. It says, they looked toward the wilderness, and there beheld the glory of God. And that's what did it. That's what we need to do. You don't need to be stressed about what's happening. Yeah, we know tribulation. We always have. World always have. We face individual problems, all of us do. But this world is in the hands of a God who's going to have the last word, a God of love, mercy, and grace. In this world, you shall have tribulation. But be of good cheer. For Christ, for God, has overcome the world. I want to pray with you. Kind Father, we give you thanks for your love that nothing can destroy, an indestructible, wonderful love for saving us. Things look black sometimes, but in the darkness, the light shines. Not all the darkness in the world can extinguish it. Help us to see the truth, to hang on to it, to keep on keeping on in the midst of tribulation, knowing that you are God and you love us. Thank you. In Christ's name we ask it. Amen. Amen.
I'm so glad that you were here on my last Sunday. And I don't think anybody brings a message with such animation, such an engaging sense of humor, so much positivity, and a compelling and beautiful Christian message as you do. We thank you so much. Remember tradition on Wednesday night, and we'll see you all back here Sunday for Mike's first Sunday. Have a good week.